Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We're so happy you're here tonight for our program that is co-hosted by 3GNY and 3G Philly. Tonight, we are celebrating the launch of Austrian Again by Anne Hand, a memoir that explores family history, identity, and the journey of reclaiming Austrian citizenship as a descendant of Holocaust survivors. It's a story about discovery, resilience, and connection, themes that speak deeply to so many of us in the 3G community. I'm Cindy Silverman, and I serve on the board of 3G Philly. Like Anne's grandparents, my grandparents too were fortunate to find a way out of Vienna, and I too only recently uncovered their story. For me, these stories remind us how fragile freedom can be and how easily propaganda can erode the rights and humanities of others. It's truly an honor to be here tonight celebrating Anne's book, A Vienna Sister, and sharing how our family stories continue to shape who we are today. I'm also delighted to introduce my co-moderator, Meghan Stevenson-Krausz, also from 3G Philly. Meghan and I met during the 3G speaker training and quickly discovered an unexpected connection. Our grandparents both fled Vienna. Our grandparents were born the same year, and they lived just a block apart. We like to think that maybe they went to school together.
Thanks so much, Cindy, and hi everyone. And I'm going to apologize in advance if I start coughing. I seem to be in that 10% who got the flu from the flu vaccine, so thanks for bearing with me on that. As Cindy mentioned, actually all of us here this evening are Vienna sisters. So my grandfather was from Vienna, my grandmother was from a small town on the border of Austria and Hungary called Deutschkreuz. And I'm thrilled to be here tonight in conversation with Anne. Um, Together, 3G New York and 3G Philly are part of a growing movement of 3G organizations committed to preserving memory and transforming it into education, empathy, and action. Both 3G Philly and 3G New York are proud affiliates of Living Links, the first national network of organizations created to empower grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. Through its partnership with the USC Shoah Foundation, Living Links helps expand the reach and impact of our shared educational programs across the country. Our 3G speakers share their families' Holocaust stories in classrooms and community settings. We provide a human face to the past and a living link to the present, hence the name, inspiring our listeners to stand up to hatred and to act with courage and compassion, something the world desperately needs more of today, and something that I think is really exemplified in the story that Anne has put down in Austrian Again. This work depends on community support. Every presentation, classroom visit, and program like tonight's is offered free of charge to schools and participants so that no one is excluded from hearing these powerful stories. And your donations make that possible. Some of you have already donated, and for that, we are very grateful. And if you are inspired by what you hear tonight, we invite you to contribute. Your support helps both 3G New York and 3G Philly continue to engage speakers, reach students, and build understanding across generations. We'll put the link in the chat. I think that, yeah, Haley's already done it. Thank you, Haley. um, so actually, another thing that Cindy and I have in common with Anne is that we've both also gotten our our Austrian citizenships as well. So we'll be discussing that among other things this evening. But actually, I also just realized that Anne and I got our notification a week apart that we had become Austrian again. So now, without further ado, I am so pleased to introduce our featured speaker for this evening, Anne Hand. Anne was born in 1985 in New York, and just like us, as mentioned, she's a descendant of Austrian Jews. Her grandmother was a librarian. I think she's even wearing a shirt this evening in her honor. Um, and she grew up attached to the power of the written word. Her love of books and the worlds they transported her to have always fueled her desire to make change in the world, and has spent her career blending research, policy, and practice to create social impact across the Americas and beyond. She is a recognized expert in global education and development, publishing on topics related to technology and social impact. Um, I am very excited about Anne's first book, Austrian Again, Reclaiming a Lost Legacy. This moving memoir is timely and very personal, weaving together memoir and historical research. I'm excited to let Anne tell you more about her story. So And Mazel Tov. And I think, to get us all started, would love to just hear a little bit more about your process. Why did you decide to write this story, and why did you decide to seek Austrian citizenship?
Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Cindy. Thanks to everybody who's here. This is so exciting. And honestly, like the book was released yesterday, and it still kind of didn't really feel real, I guess, up until now, because everything is kind of on the computer, or it's, people who I've been talking to about it for a long time. I mean, it's been a 5-year process from, first sort of hearing that I was eligible and or thinking that I might be eligible, hearing about the process, thinking that I might be eligible, doing the research, going through all the paperwork, doing all the stuff, writing the book, and then fast forward and here we are, and it's totally crazy. So I'm just gonna not think about it. I think. And I'm so happy to be here, and I so appreciate everybody who's made the time in their busy lives and busy schedules to be here in conversation, to be here in community, because that's really what this process I think allows us to do in a different way. It allows us to build a community, develop a community that is based on, these historical facts, these very unfortunate things that all of our families went through, and just the process of not forgetting it, wanting to commemorate it in different ways, wanting to honor what they went through, and also celebrate how they triumphed. I think that that's incredibly important, especially as the world itself just sometimes feels more and more complicated every day. So thank you for offering the space, and thank you to everybody who's here for filling it. I'm just so excited and so honored.
Well, we share that excitement, Anne. And I think, what you said about it's this 5-year process, could certainly resonate with that in terms
I
of,
know, I know. So,
yeah.
yeah, I started writing the book kind of as a way to process what I was going through, and we can talk about this a little bit more later. Cindy and Megan, I'm sure that you had your own ways of coping with what you were learning, and to me, some of it was just a matter of, I think, trying to wrap my head around everything. And the big thing for me, in a way, was that, my family never considered themselves victims of World War II. That's not a narrative that I grew up with. That's not a narrative that was transmitted to me in any way, shape, or form. I think that, when you learned about World War II, when you learned about the Nazis and the concentration camps and the Holocaust, at least in the 80s and 90s when we were learning about it, I think that it was very clear that the way that victimhood was framed, it was around the camps, and it was around, the people who were in the camps directly. And my family was very lucky. The last people who were in Vienna in 1938 were my great grandmother and a great aunt, and they already had relatives in the US who had been trying to get them to leave for a long time. Eventually, I'm not quite sure what happened, but eventually, they said, okay, fine, we'll do the paperwork. And they filed their visa paperwork for the US as sponsored by their US citizen relatives a week before the Anschluss. And so that was incredibly lucky. And they were out by June. The Anschluss happened in March. They were out by June, and they never talked about it with their kids. They never talked about it with their grandkids. They never, all of it just kind of, didn't get transmitted down to the generations, where we are now. And so as I was trying to understand, okay, like it seems like I'm eligible for this process, but like it's all about victimhood, and I don't consider my family victims. And so it helped me to start to process this idea of just the devastation and the way in which not just people, but entire entire Jewish civilization basically of Central and Eastern Europe was completely destroyed, and all of those lives were uprooted. And then it becomes a question of, okay, like, do you consider yourself a victim? Do you consider the extended family that just basically disappeared into the void? Are they the victims? Is everybody a victim? Like, what does this mean? How do I relate to this if this isn't the way that I grew up thinking about it? And it was a way to start to process all of that. And then somewhere along the line, I just started to realize, you know what? I'm going through something incredibly unique in the world. And I say that, very, very honestly, because, I've worked a lot internationally. I've seen, different, maybe not experienced it, but like heard a lot of different stories over the years in terms of, things that happened in like the 70s and 80s and the ways in which other people were forced to flee and find ways into, different societies and basically different lives. And, there isn't this kind of restitution in the same way. I mean, Austria in the past, they did give money to people whose property was confiscated. They did sort of, try to, cut those checks and make those payoffs. But there was never this question of, what does this mean to our society? What does this mean to our country? That we basically have created a diaspora of the people who fled and then their descendants who do in their own way, retain a very, very strong, cultural relationship. I think we can all talk, speak to the food and the music and the art and this kind of way of life that Viennese Jews brought with them, when they left Vienna. And so there's this part of, this culture and this country, Austria, that still exists, but it's permutated and it's flown and it's gone different ways. And so for this country, 3, 4 generations later to basically say, not just say like, okay, like we didn't take full responsibility for what happened. And we're also going to reopen the door. And if you want to walk through it, you can do that. Like, nobody does that. No country does that. And not in the way that Austria did it. And so I felt like it was something, really just important to, to, to track and to memorialize, not just for myself and for my family, but also, for all of us who have been going through this in different ways, and then hopefully, for the future and for history, because, it really does say it's never too late to try to make amends for what happens, and there are going to be people like us, and a lot of people, I think 35,000 people at this point have become Austrian again. It's incredible, what even just opening that door will do and who's going to walk through it.
Cindy, you're muted.
Thanks. Your story really resonates with me because you recently found out your family story. I recently found out my family story. And a lot of people are still finding out their family story. So although it's deeply personal, it's also this communal thing that we are all experiencing together. And many of these stories have been hidden for protection or it was too painful. And now it is really a way to say, you know what, you're not erased. Your story is still vibrant, and we're going to carry your legacy. And this is one way that we'll do it.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Cindy. And something also that was really important to me about all of this was the fact that, there's a lot written about Viennese Jews and World War II and what happened. The most prominent recent example I think is Leopoldstadt, the play, that won a million Tonys and really, got a global audience engaged and interested in this topic. And I've never seen my family's story reflected in any of the historical works, in any of the drama, in any of these kinds of, you know, these pieces that really get out there because my family was working class and my family, they owned a tavern and my family was not wealthy, but my family was impacted by all of this just like everybody else. And I think it's something also, we all deserve to see ourselves reflected in art, in literature. We all deserve to see ourselves reflected out there in one way or another. And I never did. And I guess also maybe my hope is that this could also, open the door to people feeling like their story is worth telling. If they don't see themselves reflected, but then they don't tell their story or they don't dig a little deeper and tell their family's story in a different way, it's not going to be told. And then the narratives will just be somebody else's. So it's so important, I think, not just that we know what happened, but we take ownership and we put it out there and we say, no, this is valuable and this is important, and these stories also deserve to be told.
Yeah, I think there's so much, I mean, there's so much in the book that like resonates for me as well. And actually that piece around class in particular, right? Because and I know you and I have talked about this offline as well, but just that uh I've never really thought about from our 2025 lens. I found in doing research around my family, I had found that like actually there's a census from the early 30s where two of my like my great aunt who was already in New York and my great uncle were both in New York apparently for the census. And I was like very confused by this because my great uncle definitely went back to Austria. And from a 2025 lens, I was thinking about this as like, oh, well, they had the means to have come to the US. But after reading Austrian Again and thinking about it, through the sort of 1930s or 1920s lens, one of the things that I learned or just thought about differently from what you shared or in your writing was to think about it as actually those who came to the US, these were economic migrants, like, right? These people were looking for there was a need for finding other opportunity elsewhere. And I really hadn't thought about it that way because like that's just not, I'm looking at it from a 2025 lens. And that was really eye-opening for me to think about it through in a different way and also see more of like my own family experience through what you shared. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to really just like recognize that these migration and immigration patterns, like they're not always linear, right? It's not like, people are fleeing and that's it and they land somewhere. And it's like, no,
Yes.
there were people who left, before things got really bad politically, in Austria in terms of persecution and in terms of anti-Semitism and racism. I mean, those trends were, of course, already there. And in the interwar period, a lot of people left, back when, you could just get on a boat and go through Ellis Island and, get off the boat and start working. And that was a reality for about 5 years, right? And the people who did it because they couldn't work where they were because they needed to leave. And then, you fast forward 10, 15 years and the situation has changed and you're looking at, a really serious, political persecution and racial persecution and religious persecution. That's not just about economics anymore. And these things they're just so complicated and there's no way of knowing one way or the other, right? Like which way they're gonna go or how they're gonna evolve in the moment. I think people, you sort of hear this question sometimes of, oh, well, how did they know? It's like nobody knew. Nobody knew. They knew their realities and they knew, maybe they could leave, maybe they couldn't, maybe they didn't want to, maybe, every circumstance is different. And it's just so important to, I don't want to say celebrate, it's certainly not the word, but, really, have a really clear and deeper understanding of the complexity of all of this for everybody, and that it really wasn't until March 1938 in Austria's case, every country kind of had a different, line, but in Austria's case, it was March 1938. Austria got annexed by the Nazi regime, and then everybody was like, oh, everybody who's still there was like, oh my gosh, you know, people just didn't see it coming. And behind all of those decisions about whether to go or not go, there was just, before that, there was just so much behind it. And that's not always well captured, I don't think.
I have to ask, what do you think your grandparents would think?
So what my mom says is that they would be getting a kick out of all of it right now. They'd be like, wow, you wrote the book, you did this, like this is crazy. We've got an author in the family now. I, but when I first started exploring all of this and I started digging a little bit, I'm not sure how happy they would have been, to be perfectly honest. I'm not sure that they would have understood the curiosity, or maybe sympathized with it. They might have said, like you want to know, I can tell you some stuff, but like, don't go digging. I don't think they would have realized how easy it is to find a lot of this stuff these days, and how much is just available either on free websites without even having to register. I mean, that are just part of the public record that are just available for a web search. Like the Ellis Island Registry is just like you type in a name, like you just go into your browser, you type in your ancestor's name, and if they pass through Ellis Island, they show up. But then if you go to, Ancestry or Genie or a lot of these other sites, they just scoop up all of these public records that I don't think anybody realized were public records. So I found, my grandfather's petition for naturalization because all of the US federal records like that become public after 75 years. And so if my grandparents could see me, I'm not sure they'd like that I could see those pictures and those bureaucratic records and all of that kind of stuff. But to me, it was really cool because you see a slice of their life that is very, very different than, the grandparent that you grew up with or the stories that you heard. Um, and and to me, it's just such a cool thing to think like, I don't know what's going to be public record of what I did in 75 years. I don't know who's gonna, go scraping in and what they're gonna dig up and what they're gonna find. And I just, to me, like, I hope that they would be happy that I was curious, and I hope that they would be happy that I wanted to find out, because then what that means is that, people are thinking about them and they're still remembered and their lives haven't been forgotten and we all want to think that, what we do will live on and our legacies will move on in ways that, we can't always control. So I hope they would be happy to know that, I wanted to know more about them and their own legacies.
Yeah, so you answered the question of maybe not happy, but maybe warmed by it. And I feel the same way. I don't think my grandparents had I think they had a bitter taste in their mouth. I know they had a bitter taste in their mouth about Austria. But at the same time, I feel like the first 20 something years or 30 years of their life was just erased. And so now, they get to say, my granddaughter and great granddaughter are have continued our legacy and our story was worth something. So I feel the same way, like it's conflicted. And so
Yeah.
it never has to be an either or, right? We can feel both two things at once. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't know my grandparents, but all the stories that I mean, I knew my grandfather, but I was four when he died, and all the stories are that how much he loved Vienna. I do know he did go back once. My grandmother didn't. My grandfather did go back, but I think he just kind of felt like it was not his home anymore. Mm.
And that's important to recognize too. Like my grandfather never went back. My great grandmother never went back. And but my great aunts did go back. And they went and they talked with neighbors who were still there. This was like in the 70s, I think. They visited their father's grave, which is still there in the Central Cemetery in Vienna. And but they went back to New York after that and they were like, okay, like we scratched that itch, we're done. And I think that everybody really like they moved on and they were like, our lives aren't there anymore. They're not.
Right.
And our lives are here and that's fine. And I think it is this question of this door, right? Like the door is open, you don't have to walk through. Like you don't. And my grandfather wouldn't have walked through. Like he absolutely would not have. So it's kind of like, okay, well, he didn't have to, but like I could. And that's a different story too. And then the story goes from, just being kind of this fossil in a way, like in amber or something, and it turns into a different story, and the story becomes a lot more contemporary and it becomes this idea of, what do we hope to do with this? Well, of course, recognizing what our families went through and recognizing what they would have thought, or having ideas at least about what they would have thought. But it's not just that, it's saying, okay, like that happened. but what do I do with this now? And what does this mean now?
Yeah. Mhm. My grandparents also went back. We didn't know the story at the time, and their photos are in front of their childhood homes, the home that they lived in when they were married. And I think I would have to agree with you, like it was somewhat like closure. Like I got to go back, I got to say goodbye, and now I'm going to return to my life the way it was, and I moved on, and I'm going to keep moving on. Um, so I get that. Tell us how you uncovered your family story.
It was a lot of kind of connecting the dots and putting the pieces together. So we had this box, right? So I saw the article about this process, the citizenship process. And I knew that we had a box, and I knew that my mom had gotten this box when her last surviving aunt had passed away, maybe like 20 years before at that point. And when we got the box, we had opened it, and I had already seen my great grandmother's and my great aunt's passports from that they used to leave Austria in 1938. So I knew that we had some documentation. But I just didn't know what else was there, and I didn't know what it meant, I guess. So I took a long time, and this was sort of at the beginning of the COVID winter in late 2020. So there was time, and I couldn't go anywhere. And so it was me in the box. And I went through all these pictures. A lot of them were unlabeled. You could sort of separate them by time and by you know, period. Some of them were in the US, some of them were like me and my cousins, some of them were like, mid 1800s. I don't know who these people are. But it was just like this big mishmash of stuff. And I tried to separate it out, and I tried to figure out what I could figure out from, the pictures that had captions, the pictures that were labeled on the back, and put those into the search engines, especially Ancestry and Genie. And I realized that's like we were this like tiny, tiny branch on somebody else's gigantic family tree in Genie. So that was also very weird to see that like somehow we were included by like an eighth cousin 5 times removed or something like that. But it was cool, right? And you start to sort of figure this out. You start to connect the dots. You start to connect it with the stories that you heard as a kid. You start to connect it with these other pieces of the puzzle. And I think like the book in a way was kind of hard to write because like this story, like the way that I experienced it, it wasn't linear, I guess. It was me trying to put the pieces together. And then once I had a story that, made sense for our application and then made sense kind of for my own like emotional understanding of what happened, then it became more of just like a narrative and a thought, just thinking about what all of this meant in today's terms. So the book itself, it doesn't start out, necessarily with I don't know, this setting that then like moves directly. It really starts out with like me thinking about my grandfather because he was the connection, even though, he left Vienna when he was 18 because he didn't see a future for himself there. He was the one whose cultural lessons and just like the closeness and growing up, with him until he passed away. That was what I connected with all of this. And we all have our own person, I think, that we connect with all of this most closely. And those are the ones that like make the story feel like it's worth exploring and make it feel like it's worth telling and make it feel like it's worth digging deeper. So, I started with that and then figuring out the historical piece. We also had some letters, actually. There were some letters in the box that we couldn't read. They were from like late 1937 to when they left, basically in May 1938. That was the last letter. And I scanned them. I sent them to a friend in Germany who couldn't read them either because nobody writes like that anymore in Germany. Like the handwriting is just too old. But he asked if he could show it to his parents who could read it because that was the way that, his grandparents had written and their grandparents had written. And they were really helpful just in terms of, kind of going back to this question of like, how did they leave? When did they leave? All of that. Because I thought there might be something there that told more of that story. And no, it was just like family gossip and what they did for dinner and like, oh, finally we went to the embassy and we got our paperwork in and I'm kind of stressed about it. And like just like normal stuff. And that's the part that really kills me. Like in the lead up to all of this, and even as they were very, very fortunate to be able to leave when they did, um, they they just wanted to communicate normal stuff halfway across the world to their kids in New York, and that's crazy. You just want your kids to feel like things are normal and under control. So you're talking about eating cauliflower soup for dinner.
I love that you have that little anecdote. That feels too specific to not be real. Um, yeah. It's interesting you say that. We have some letters as well, but I have not gotten translated yet because I can read a little bit, and I know now these were written later, and they're from my great grandfather, and they are a little bit more desperate, and so I've just been kind of honestly scared to get them translated and know what they say. Um, but I have to say that you're inspiring me, and Cindy has also inspired me to try to get some of them translated. Um, but
Yeah,
Some of
there
them, they're
was.
not easy to read, right? When
yeah.
the desperate ones are not easy to read, but they are history.
Yeah.
And as they drip in, because mine dripped in, I had to be careful about what time of day I was actually reading it. I remember reading one at work and I like had trouble recovering. To think about that as what my family was going through was really hard.
Yeah.
So, but I think, when we think about connections and our family legacy, it really enriches who we are and where we came from.
Yeah, and I will say, like, some of the letters, it wasn't just all this family gossip. Like there were some letters from cousins also, and they were starting to talk about that, but the tone, because again, it was still like early 1938, right? And nobody thought that in a year things would change so dramatically. And one of the letters from the cousins that like really killed me, like honestly, was like there was a paragraph, maybe two-thirds of the way through the letter that was like, we could try to go somewhere, we could try to go to Argentina, we could try to go to Bolivia, but like, what are we going to do there? And I think that,
Mm.
for most people that was the reality, right? Like you can try to leave and there's still places to go, but you know, life settles in, you're established where you're from, you can't imagine that things are going to evolve the way that they evolved. So yeah, just understanding all of this better, I think is so important for us. And then being able to talk about it with our families now. And those can be very hard conversations too, Cindy, like you're saying, right? How do you talk about it? Like even what time of day do you read the letter, right? Like how does it impact you? How does it continue to impact us? And it's
Right.
important to say that. And it's important to, have skin in the game too and say, yeah, like this is my family's story. This is and I don't have to sugarcoat it, for you because I think it's going to make you uncomfortable, Austrian person, so that's a nice thing in a way to be able to, just be upfront about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you hope your future generations get from your book and from your legacy, your family legacy?
Um, I really, really hope that people are better able to embrace their stories no matter what they say and no matter where they're from, and even when they're difficult, and even when they they say things that make us uncomfortable, or they say things that are upsetting, or they say things that like we might interpret differently from other people that we care about. I think just, you know, um it's important to face our past, and it's important to face our legacies so that we can then, take that and sort of move through the world in a more whole kind of way. I think that, I didn't realize what I was missing until I went through this process and I did all of this. In a way, I always thought that other people's lives were like a lot more interesting than mine, and other parts of the world were more interesting. And I never thought that I would have anything to say. Not that I didn't have a voice, right? Like I worked and I did presentations and I did stuff, but not in the same way, and not in a way where there's just something that comes out of a process like this, for many people, where you come out of it feeling like you sort of filled a hole that you didn't know that you had. And that's a really empowering thing. And it allows me, and I don't know about the two of you, but it allows me to kind of move through the world in a different way, and in a way where I don't feel as insecure. Not that I felt super insecure before, but maybe I did, and I didn't realize how I did. And it's just a way, um, to recognize and to honor, this past, so that my present becomes more precious, and my future becomes more exciting. So I hope people take that away, and I hope that people, especially if they're thinking about doing this kind of research for themselves, or pursuing, whether it's Austrian, or a different kind of descendant citizenship or something like that. The journey itself is just as important as the outcome. The journey to understanding what your family went through, things that maybe they didn't want to pass down and didn't want to communicate, like understanding maybe why they didn't want to talk about that stuff. And then, and in the end, saying, like, this just makes me feel, so much more empathetic. You never know what people are going through. You never know, how their lives have unfolded, and we can just move through, like, more considerate, both to ourselves and to other people, and more conscientious and more kind. And that's my hope.
Those are great hopes for,
Love that.
right, for people to hear and for people to know, that they're not alone and we share a lot of the same commonalities in our families.
Yeah.
We do have some questions in the Q&A. The first one says, I'm the direct descendant of Austrians who perished in the Shoah, and I also recently reclaimed my Austrian citizenship. Have you returned to Austria? And if so, can you talk about your experience of going back?
Megan, you go first. You went.
Okay. So yes, actually, as I mentioned, I got my citizenship a similar timeline to Anne. So in early 2022, right? And then actually the next year, in June of 2023, my sister and I did a trip, a quintessential American road trip around the former Austro-Hungarian Empire. So not only to Vienna, but also actually, we planned the trip and then sort of started digging deeper into some of those many archives that Anne mentioned, and realized that, I knew my grandfather was born in Vienna, but I hadn't known that his parents were actually from Jor in Hungary and Sered in Slovakia. And then, so we started in Vienna, and then we went to Deutschkreuz, which was the really small town that my grandmother was from. And then we kind of, it's at the border. So like when she was born, it was actually Hungary, but when she fled, it was Austria. And that was its own weird thing because it's technically in the Schengen zone, right? And so you can just cross the border. And so we crossed and there was nobody there. And when we actually came back in the next day to like go back into town and visit the cemetery and try to see if there were any stones of family members, unfortunately, it was mostly destroyed in the war, but there were a few. There was actually somebody at the border. And so I only had my license, my American license. I didn't have a passport or anything. I was like, wait, I am an Austrian citizen. But my sister had her ID card and they took my license. So, but yeah, it was a very special experience to visit the places. The only addresses that we had that still seemed to be legitimate addresses were actually in Vienna. The other places were such small towns that, I think streets change, numbers change, buildings change. And so, we were able to visit places in Vienna where my family was living. And the other places, it was more about just kind of experiencing the environment, and connecting with that history, which in Deutschkreuz, I will note, had to do with winemaking. So I learned that my grandmother's family were winemakers. And actually, we found a winemaker there who remembered, like, they recognized the name Bruckner, which is my grandmother's maiden name. So I do highly recommend it if you have the opportunity. But it also was like really bittersweet to see a family, like that could have been my family, but for the war. So it's hard. It's rewarding, but it's a challenging journey.
I went back. I've been back twice. I went back with the first time I went back with my mom, my dad, my family, my husband and daughter, and my brother to lay the memorial stones for my great grandparents. And that was a very rewarding experience to meet people from all over the world who share a lot of the same history. And then it was very special for me to share with my mom, going to some of these addresses of my great grandparents and where her parents had lived. And it really culminated with a service at the only surviving synagogue. My grandparents were not members there, but many of their family members were. And so sitting in that synagogue, to me was just extremely special. And then the second time I went back with my daughter, to sort of feel like what is this city all about? And try to feel the coffee culture, the Sachator, like all the cultural aspects of it.
So I have not been back, but I will be going back in a few months because I'm really excited that the Vienna Jewish Museum is going to be hosting an event for Austrian Again in March. So I'll have to go for that. I know, terrible to have to go, but no, it's going to be really cool. It's I still don't quite know what to make of it. I don't think I have the words yet, but in a way, I hope it feels kind of like a homecoming, and I hope it's something that, it's one thing to have these conversations here and with our diaspora community. It's another thing, I think, to kind of, try to approach. I don't know if it's the mothership. I don't know if it's just kind of an orbiting satellite at this point. I have no idea. So I'm also very excited, to sort of what you're saying, Cindy, to feel what the city feels like now, and to understand, if there's anything that I feel within that as well.
I hope you give yourself more time than just the event.
Oh yeah, 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 absolutely. Yeah, no. I would not just go for like, 36 hours just to go for it. No, we'll be there for a few weeks. It'll be
Amazing.
exciting. How
Yes,
long do you
that'll be.
recommend I stay for?
Oh gosh. I mean, I think we did like a 10-day thing, and it was enough to just scratch the surface. And I actually have been thinking about going back for like at least a month to just sort of, like you said, like get a feel for living there. What is it like? And I did see there's a question here about whether we're learning German as part of this process. Um, and I will say I actually started studying German in school because it was my dad's first language, right? So like my grandparents spoke to him in German. They spoke amongst themselves, they spoke Hungarian. That was the secret language. And they spoke to my dad in German and his sister. And so until I was 3, he spoke to me in German. But then when I was 3, he started teaching me Hebrew, which he was not as fluent in. And I always was like, why didn't you just keep speaking to me in German? So I started taking it when I was in university. At this point, it's very basic, but it is, I will say, like, I would like to sort of re-up that and get better. So that would be part of the plan of staying for at least a month or so.
I have not personally learned German. It is a hard language for me to listen to, personally. I could learn Yiddish. That is the language my grandparents spoke. Um, so I think that has more meaning to me.
So my family did not pass down German or Yiddish, even though on my dad's side of the family, both of my grandparents spoke Yiddish to each other and not to the kids. And then on my mom's side, my grandfather just, like, German was not something they spoke in the house. They didn't. He spoke it with his mother and his sisters, but he didn't. My grandmother didn't speak German. they were American. They spoke English. So, my German is very, very bad. I do know how to say that in German, sehr schlecht. Um, but other than saying I can say I speak German very badly in German. Yeah, so I learned Spanish as an adult, and I know that it took me about a year and a half to really feel comfortable in the language, and that's not a commitment I can make to German right now. With my life and with everything going on, but knowing that it would be that kind of a process, maybe in a few years it'll be like, okay, I want to do the deep dive and I want to really, you know, be halfway decent in this language. But I do know it would take a lot of work, at least for me.
Yeah.
Interestingly, many people in Vienna speak English.
Oh my God, so many.
So many.
Speaking of, there's a question for Anne here. Has the experience doing extensive research and writing this book made any specific location in Vienna especially meaningful to visit now?
Oh, so my family lived in Hernals, which is the 17th district. It is still not a very well-off district. I mean, it's gentrifying from what I understand, but it's been working class for a very long time. And so that's an area that I don't think most tourists get to, but for me it would be, very meaningful to go back. I've actually gone on Google Maps and looked up their apartment address and looked up, we have, pictures of my great grandmother in front of the tavern and, all of these things. But now it's just, it's just an apartment building. Like there's nothing there that is really, the shape of the building is the same. The bones are there, but it's not theirs. So I think, since I went once, right, when I was like 22 and I was there for 12 hours doing all of the super touristy stuff downtown that like you do on the hop off bus. Um, you know, so I don't feel the need to do that, but I think that for me going, that there's the family research and all of that is really centered in Hernals. But I think for me, like I'm just curious, like where I feel comfortable, if there's anywhere in the city that I feel comfortable, where I can just feel like myself as I'm moving through it. One of my friends who's Austrian actually recommended I check out the 20th district, which I think is just south of Leopoldstadt. She said that's a fun area, like really, really diverse, really multicultural. So, check that out, check out Hernals. And of course, there are all the museums, and some of it I'm just curious about because my grandfather. So I didn't find any of this actually when I was doing the research, but my grandfather went to trade school, which, according to the family stories, was in the central castle at the time in the 1920s, and so sort of tracing from where he lived in Hernals to like the central castle and all of that, like that walk seems really really cool. And there's a way to do it now where you can like go by the Freud Museum and you can go by the new monument to the Holocaust that they opened about 5 years ago. Those are both in the ninth district, which is kind of in the middle between the downtown area and Hernals. So yeah, I think that there are like things sort of like bopping around in my head that I'm curious about. Um, and I just want to see how they feel and I want to see, if I feel like I connect with them.
Well, I think we have to start wrapping up. Um, it's a great conversation. And again, you can purchase Anne's book on Amazon and Bookshop. Is that
Hmm.
Bookshop?
Yep,
Um,
please do.
it is a great uh, memoir, and I think if anybody is considering any type of citizenship in any country, it's certainly you can resonate with the themes that are weaved throughout the book. Tonight's conversation really reminds us that this journey is one so many of us share. Some of us already reclaimed our citizenship in the countries where our families once lived, and others are thinking about it. Wherever you are in that process, it reflects something we all feel, that deep desire to restore a connection to the history that was tried to be that was erased. These acts of reconnection are powerful. They honor those who came before us and remind us that we still belong to their story. Anne, thank you for sharing your story and your heart with us tonight. Austrian Again captures so beautifully the mix of discovery, pride, and healing that so many of us experience when we reclaim something once lost. Your story reminds us that by breaking silence of the past, we don't just recover history, we reclaim a sense of belonging and hope for the future. Thank you.
Oh,
Oh,
thank you,
thank you.
Cindy. Thank you, Megan. No, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, both of you, Cindy and Anne, for such a moving and thoughtful conversation. We're so grateful to have you as part of the 3G New York and 3G Philly community and for everything you do to support Holocaust memorial and memory and education. I'm also really excited about this session in March in Vienna. Might see if I can try to get there for that too. So, catch
Do
you
it,
in
do it,
Vienna.
do it.
And for those of you who joined us tonight, thank you as well. And if you haven't had a chance yet, we hope you'll consider making a gift to support our educational programs. You'll find the donation link right in the chat. Haley's already put it there for you. And we'd also love your feedback about tonight's event, so please keep an eye out for a short survey in your email. Your input really helps to make these programs even more meaningful. And as mentioned, also, we did try to send the PDF that Anne put together with tips on applying for your Austrian citizenship. Some people are having trouble getting it in the chat, so that will also be sent to you via email. Thank you all again so much for being here tonight. Please go buy Austrian Again. It's a wonderful read. And Mazel Tov again on your book.
Oh, thank you. Thank you to everybody for being here. Thank you to Haley, who's been behind the scenes as a super rock star with everything, all the moving parts. Thanks to Dave, and thanks to, just the community for opening the space and filling it with wonderful people. Thank you so much.
Thank you.